Welcome to the Centre for Career and Calling, where we bring you information, resources and food for thought on vocational discernment and professional formation.
We're going to get started. And so my name is Kathleen Bush, for those that haven't met me. And I work in our community relations office at King's, and I've been there for 3 years now, but I came back to King's after being away for a number of years, and I had been residence director. Nobody on here, so the older ones. So about 15 years ago, I was residence director when we built the apartment. So it was kind of fun to come back to King's and reconnect with a lot of people. So I take care of our alumni, our parents, and our churches in our office. And I have the pleasure of working with, we have actually about 6,500 alumni these days. And so that's exciting and spread out all over the world. And I work with Ashley in our office and also Shaylin. And Shaylin is a graduating student this year. And she is our student worker, and she is actually going to take over from me and MC the evening. So over to you, Shay.
Right, perfect. Thank you, Kathleen. So obviously, as she said, I'm Shaylin, or Shay, as many of you already know me by. And yeah, I'm graduating this year, as many of you are graduating this year as well. So this will be a learning experience for me as much as it is for you. So we're just going to jump right into introductions, and we've got a full list of lovely panelists this evening for you, and they are from a variety of different backgrounds and a variety of different disciplines. So we'll just jump right into it. If we want to start off with Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Boessenkool. I graduated King's in 2020, and I got my Bachelor of Arts in philosophy, and I minored in theology. And right from King's, I moved to Boston in the fall of 2020, and I began my PhD in philosophy at Boston College, which is where I am now. I'm currently in my second year of the program, and I'm teaching and studying there currently.
I think that puts me next, doesn't it? My name is Elisa Maboma. I graduated from King's in 2017 and took a year off, forced year off. And I went to do my master's in public history at the University of Victoria in 2018. So yeah, and so that was a couple of years ago. I graduated from that in 2020. Graduated for the pandemic, but I didn't have to do much of my schooling during the pandemic, which was nice.
I believe that puts Ian next.
All right. I'm Ian. I graduated from King's around 2015 with a bachelor's in chemistry. And I went on to the University of Alberta, where I got my master's in analytical and environmental toxicology. So looking at some drinking water disinfection byproducts, and that opened up into an opportunity that I pursued in Saskatoon with Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's now blossomed into a PhD program for me, looking at the environmental behavior of organic contaminants in the Athabasca oil sands.
I think that's me next. So I'm Josh Belter. I graduated from King's with Anna in 2020. I got my Bachelor of Arts in theology, and I minored in history, and that worked out very well for me because I got accepted at the University of Edinburgh, which is in Scotland, if you don't know, in their theology and history program. So that was a nice mix of both my disciplines into one degree. And so I just graduated in December with my Master's of Theology and Theology and History, but that's a mouthful, so I just say Master's of Theology and History. And as a quick aside, I don't know if any of you felt like this, but when I was at King's, I kind of felt like King's is so small, it doesn't feel like a real university. The education is good enough to get you into high-end universities around the world, so don't feel discouraged in your studies at King's. It's a good education.
Is it me next? I'm not sure. I'm just going to go for it. My name is Ryleigh Jacobs. I graduated from King's with 2 degrees, so BSc in chemistry in 2014, and then from the Ed program in 2016. Then I took some time off, and then I went to Harvard, where I studied international education policy at the Graduate School of Education. And currently I'm a vice principal at a school in the Fraser Valley, and I do research for the Harvard Smithsonian in science education, as well as some volunteering with the government of Maharashtra and in Belize.
Okay, so me last, I believe. So I graduated from King's in 2018. I had a major in English and I minored in biology. At that point in time, I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to go to law school or med school. I ended up going to law school. So I'm currently attending the University of Saskatchewan College of Law in Saskatoon. I'm in the last semester of my law school. Currently, I'm heading the direction of criminal law, specifically prosecution. I'll be articling for the Solicitor General in Alberta here in the summer. So.
Great. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves to us. We'll just jump right into questions, and I'll just preface, we have a set number of questions that are, if I'm counting correctly, five 7 questions, and we have a few different people answering them. And then we'll just open it up to a question period, and you guys are free to unmute yourselves and just ask away. So we'll jump right into our first question, which is things that you have learned about applying to grad school. And we'll start again with Anna.
Yeah, so what I learned about applying to grad school. So I made the decision to go to grad school a little bit late. I decided in the fall of my senior year that was what I wanted to do. I think the number one I learned about applying to grad school is how much it is about connecting with many different people. As you all know, philosophy is a very small department, but through my professors, I was able to meet philosophy professors and students from all around the globe, just from asking, what was your experience like? What did you get out of grad school? What did you enjoy? What did you not enjoy? If you have a close relationship with a professor, it's like, you've worked with me. What are some of my strengths that you see that would make me a good candidate for grad school? So talking to professors about connections and skills, that's something that I really learned. And the other thing I guess would be is learning how to identify, I would say, your goals. When you start applying for grad school, maybe it's just because I like school or I like my discipline, but kind of narrowing in and thinking, what is it exactly that I would want out of a grad school experience, and you come to learn that as you apply, as you kind of see what's involved through that whole process, and then especially if you go through with it once you get accepted and that sort of thing. So I'd say those are the main two things. What I learned: connections, talking to professors, and number two is how to identify your goals for the next big jump and the big stage in your life. So I'll pass that to Ian.
Okay, so my path to grad school was a little bit unorthodox just because I didn't necessarily apply first and figure out things later. I wasn't really sure that my GPA would get me into grad school, so I took the unorthodox approach of finding someone whose research I thought I could get interested in and get engaged with, and read about 10 or 15 of their papers, and then came up with a set of interesting questions, and then emailed away and said, would you be interested in taking on a student? And so that worked out way better for me. Let's see what else I wrote here. It can be hard to identify where to start looking for grad school. For me, the choice was that if I wanted to go to grad school, I had to stay in Edmonton because, family, wife wanted to stay. Edmonton's just a better city than Saskatoon in many ways. But so I had to find my way by hook or by crook. So I figured that if I couldn't woo them with my GPA, that there's still people that if you act interested and if you tell them how wonderful their work is, that really puts a potential supervisor more at ease about taking you on, because interest and stubbornness can get you through grad school as much as being a prodigy. It's not necessarily about being the smartest one in the room, but if you can work really, really hard at an interesting problem, then you can still get through.
Great, thank you guys. That was very helpful advice. We're going to pass on to the next question, which is things that you wished you knew about applying. And in other words, what may have been the biggest surprise about applying? And we're going to start off with Ryleigh.
Oh, that's okay. I'll just read what I wrote. So there are people at institutions that are literally paid to help you with your applications. So I would encourage you to seek them out because they're happy to help. A lot of my friends that I met along my time studying, they all were working in admissions in some capacity, and they just basically shared how happy they were to always help students and connect you to former alumni of the institutions, as well as connect you with professors. It also all depends on the school that you're applying to, but your grades and your GPA actually don't matter that much. And Ian kind of alluded to that earlier, but again, depends on the school. Usually they look at the holistic approach to your application. And to be honest, the most important part is probably your letter of intention and stating your purpose for actually wanting to study. And for this, I would encourage you to actually think about professors' work that you admire from the institution and tailor it to that specific place. Similar to what Ian did, but not as aggressive. The other things I would encourage to, and that came as a surprise, are that a lot of the reference letters are submitted online. So you really have to remind your referees to submit their applications or their reference letters. I applied to 2 institutions, and one of my referees did not submit a reference letter. They had forgotten. And so basically I was automatically rejected from this institution. So I would really encourage you to make sure that your referees are getting the reminder emails and they're not going into their spam, because otherwise that can be a little bit of a shock. And then the last thing is that scholarships, if you're looking at scholarships, they close before the deadline for your application. So if you want to go into grad school, look for your scholarships first, and then the application is the latter date. So if you're in need of money financially, or sometimes there are really great grants and fellowships that you can apply for, they almost always close before or on the same date as the application. So I wish I had known that.
Okay, so I think I'm up after Ryleigh. So I'm speaking specifically from the law school perspective, so that does differ a little bit from the grad school. Unfortunately for law school, it really does ride on your grades and your LSAT grade. You do have to write a letter of intent, but this is kind of where it differs from grad school. I think they only use that. They're only going to look at that to make sure you can write coherent sentences if there's like a tie between students. It really does ride a lot on your grades and your LSAT. That being said, every school has different combination of requirements for your LSAT and your grades. So just for those of you that don't know, the LSAT is just the entrance exam to get into law school. You get a certain grade, and that's entered into a law school's formula, basically. So some law schools, it's maybe like a 60-40 from your LSAT to your GPA. Some maybe it's 50-50. It all depends on the law school. So I think something that I wish I had known is just not to be so intimidated by the process of applying. And I think this would probably go for grad school as well. There's a lot of red tape you have to go through. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through, especially for law school. You have to write the LSAT, you have to study for the LSAT. But don't let that discourage you. Once that's over, it's done forever. You don't have to write the LSAT again, thank goodness. And you can never look at that again. So you have to get through that, but it's worth it when you're finally done. Another thing that I wish I'd known is, in Canada, if you're looking to go to a law school, you can take a look kind of realistically of where you want to go. To me, I was more interested in Western Canada, so that really narrowed things down. And I would really recommend making a sort of spreadsheet or some sort of document that helps you keep track of dates, because every school has different application dates. when the LSAT should be written, when your reference letter should be in. And as I was applying, I got mixed up and I got my dates mixed up and I got confused, and I actually missed a deadline for applying for a law school I wanted to get into. So, I mean, it was fine in the end. I ended up going to my second choice, to the U of S, so no problem. But, you know, just go into it organized and go into it positive. You know, it can be a little intimidating and the red tape can feel like a bit much, but it only happens once. I mean, for law school, at least you only go to law school once. So you have to get through that, but it's worth it in the end. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Taylor. I believe Elise is next for this question.
Yeah, so I went to the University of Victoria and I did my MA in public history. Things I wish I would have known. I think I wish that I would have worked a little harder on my letter of intent, because there ended up being some confusion in my application process. And I was on vacation in Mexico when the grad department contacted me and asked me to re-specify my letter of intent in the next 3 days so they could decide which program or which advisor to put me with. So that was an interesting time for me. I was, you know, working on a hotel computer that was completely in Spanish. So that was a stressful time. So I wish that I would have tried to be a little more specific on that. Letter of intent, super important. I definitely had my profs at King's read it many times for me. But again, it just came down to different advisors and what their specialties were. Yeah, I also think I wish that I would have met with advisors, my potential advisors that I had kind of sought out before I decided I wanted them to be my advisor, because as much as grad school feels like, oh, they're accepting me, it's also about you and like what you want to get out of the experience. I ended up with an advisor that was a total dud, and that really was too bad. And I actually ended up going back to my professors at King's and asking them to help me with my work because they were more qualified to do it than he was. And he just like wouldn't help me with anything. He was really hard to get a hold of. So I think if I had tried to meet with him beforehand, I would have realized that he was hard to get a hold of, and I maybe would have chosen the other advisor who was really excellent because I had friends who were with her. So I do wish that I'd done a little bit of more research there instead of focusing so much on oh, they accepted me, like, thank God they pulled me, the scum from the bottom, to be in this program, you know, was kind of the idea I had about it. And I wish that I would have had a little bit more confidence about like, oh, like they want me because I'm good at what I do. And yeah, so confidence is key.
I think that's me next. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So my advice is a bit different just because I did go internationally. So for me, I didn't really, this may sound bad, but I didn't really look into the actual like finer details of the professors or anything of the University of Edinburgh. I was just like, I want to go to grad school and I'm going to apply to a bunch of places until someone accepts me. And so for me, it was, I believed and still believe that God wanted me to get my master's. And so I figured, oh, God's going to open the door wherever he wants me. And it just happened to be Edinburgh. But once that door was open, I had to figure out a lot of visa stuff. So if you're not traveling overseas to study, this won't really apply to you. But there was just a lot of bureaucracy I had to sift through in order to get my visa in on time and stuff like that. And so a lot of just waiting for the university to like actually send me my official acceptance letter that I could show the government so I could then get a visa and stuff like that. And your university website, wherever you get accepted, should have necessary information to help you with that, which is very helpful, but I still had to do a lot of Googling and stuff and figure out, okay, where's the actual office I can get my visa photo taken and stuff like that. But for me, it came down right to the wire. Like, I think I got my visa like 2 days before I actually got on the plane. But again, for me, I was like, I think God wants me here, and so it's going to work out, and it did work out. So I'm grateful for that. So trust God, but learn how to read a lot of legalese, I guess.
That might come in handy if you're actually going internationally. So smart advice. We're going to actually flip it a little bit and we'll skip the next question and move on to the next, which is, what was the transition like for you leaving King's? And we're going to start off with Taylor for this one.
Yeah, for sure. So I graduated in 2018 and then I took my gap year and I worked at King's, classic. So I worked at King's for a year as I was studying for the LSAT. So I still worked full time and I studied for the LSAT. And I felt like that gap year was very beneficial for me. So don't be afraid to take a gap year. Honestly, for law school, and I'm sure for grad school as well, a little bit of life experience, a little bit of work experience is always an asset and it's never a liability. So feel free to, take some time to, manage your student loans. I really needed that and it helped me a lot going back to school, having that kind of settled a little bit, So don't be afraid to take some time off if you need. Also, something to note for law school, and I'm sure for grad school once again, is that, if you're worried about not being with your peer group because you're waiting a year, don't worry about that. Like I was like one of the youngest persons in my law school class. So, I was definitely lacking in some of that life experience that's pretty valuable to have in those situations, right? So just something to keep in mind. I mean, if you feel confident and ready to go straight from King's into a grad school or some other vocational schooling, then for sure, but it was helpful for me to take the year. Another thing is, after attending a small and charming and community-centered university, I was really ready for a large institution. I was excited to take full advantage of all the amenities, like a big gym, rock climbing, swimming, all the rec sports I could ever ask for. So, it's great. I feel like I got the best of both worlds in a lot of ways, the small community of Kings and then like the big amenity focused university. So, something that was really helpful for me to build community there is to just find something that I like to do and find people there. So I joined a soccer team, I played dodgeball, I started going to a new church, volunteering with things that interest me. And, eventually you find your people. When you go to somewhere that interests you, you find your people there, right? So I would say, don't be intimidated after going to King's and I thought, oh, it's going to be a big school. How will this go for me? It's great. Take full advantage of everything they have to offer. You pay for it in your student fees. So definitely hit up as much of those amenities as you can.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to Ian for this question.
We're still on the transition, right?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, for me, so at some point in my final semester at King's, I decided that grad school was the path. So got my application together. As everyone else said, deadlines are integral and they are not flexible and no one will shift them around for you or keep the door open 1 minute past 4 o'clock. So hurry up with that. The transition was fairly natural, actually. As Josh touched on earlier, King's doesn't leave you flapping in the breeze relative to your peers when you get there. I found the 497 project was fairly instructive on the research process as a whole, particularly the literature review skills. When you learn your library techniques and your reference management and citation techniques, those are just writing skills that you will take with you whatever project you get into. So that was very, very helpful to not have that on the learning curve when I was in grad school trying to write a thesis. However, I did miss the community at King's. I didn't really become close with my master's cohort, and I've since been pursuing a PhD all through COVID. So I only took one course that had other students in it, and one of them was in Brazil and the other one was in South Korea. So I haven't had quite the same opportunities to develop a cohort, but I'm not really giving up yet. One thing that I didn't know about applying for grad school that I probably should have is that there's kind of an unspoken rule, or not an unspoken rule, there's some unspoken advice about applying. And that's once you kind of get the sense that you have a place in grad school, like you have your acceptance letter, you have your intended supervisor, or your intended program, at least, you need to talk to the students in the absence of the supervisor about what their research program is like, because I don't know about other disciplines, but it's true in the sciences that a lot of these supervisors are very, very competent researchers and chemists and scientists, but not necessarily super competent people managers. And so there's some cruelty to grad school. Sometimes there's a lot of not niceness that can happen. So you've got to be very careful paying attention to how the graduate students talk about the program and about the coursework and about the profs when the profs and the postdocs aren't around. That's a very difficult skill, to try and listen for the things they do say as well as the things they don't say, and their overall stress level. So be very, very careful before you commit that you aren't committing to someone who's going to expect the impossible of you. My supervisor was very good in terms of giving me the world if I wanted to pursue the world. She would support me, whatever the project was that I wanted to pursue, but I had to have a much more clear idea of what that project was. And I didn't get that until later in my program. So like knowing how your supervisor interacts with students and what they're good at and what they're not so good at, they're only human, and they're going to have those strengths and weaknesses, and you got to be cognizant of that.
Great. We'll go to Ryleigh.
Ryleigh, could I just ask Ian a follow-up question so we don't lose what you just said? Ian, that's just so interesting what you just said about listening for those cues from other students, and you're bang on, of course. I mean, we've probably all heard horror stories of grad school horror stories and bullying supervisors and all the rest of it, and equally there's some amazing ones too. But how would you suggest somebody applying, so somebody who's still at King's, right, and they're thinking of applying to grad school, how can they suss that out? Or are you saying like suss that out when you're in your master's before you go on and do a PhD? I'm just wondering if you have any advice around sussing out what you said before you're there.
I don't. All I can say is to be cognizant of it. You can't go in with blinders as a naive undergrad thinking that all of this is going to be a magical experience. You're going to have a great experience. You're going to take what you want from it, but you have to go in eyes wide open, knowing that you're going to take good from it. You're going to take bad from it, and watch and be as observant as you can. I'm not necessarily any more observant than anyone else. So I don't know what particulars, but just watch. Don't be totally naive about how great the experience is always going to be, because particularly in thesis-based programs, these supervisors also kind of need a pipeline of graduates or new graduate students coming in. They need to sustain their program. So quite often, these profs might be nicer up front than they are once you're in. So not necessarily intentionally, but that's just part of the process, is getting people on board and then getting them to work. So it's just about not getting too caught up in the moment and getting all too excited about it and putting on blinders, so to speak. Just always be cognizant of your own self-care. Watch out for yourself, because you have interests, your prof has interests, everyone else has interests. Look after yourself heading into grad school and throughout grad school.
Great, thank you. I see Elise has her hand up, so we'll get quickly to her and then we'll move on to Ryleigh, and then we'll get to the next question just to keep things moving a little, okay?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, saying that I don't know how it is in other programs, but I know in my program, I could change my advisor like once I was in it. Not once I was in my thesis, but I could have during my coursework decided that I wanted to do that. And I had started to realize that my supervisor was very unresponsive to emails. He really had no interest in sitting down and talking with me about anything. And I wish that I would have just taken the initiative to change my supervisor, because I think that would have made a huge difference for me. And knowing that you can do that is like a big, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it's nice to know anyway.
I want to take a moment to just put a disclaimer on what I said, because my master's under Xingfang Li was a good experience. I would do it again, but I would also take a little bit more time to look after myself. The thesis will happen. Don't try and push yourself to the grindstone quite so hard, because it's not that important.
I don't know about that, Ian. I think a whole bunch of people just dropped off the call because they don't want to pursue grad school anymore after that. I'm just kidding. When I left King's, I taught for 4 years before pursuing my master's, but I found the transition to grad school actually pretty easy, and that King's had prepared me well. I actually thought my chemistry degree with Peter Mahaffey was significantly harder than my master's degree. My time at King's also served me well, as I had a lot of support in learning how to self-advocate and figure out who I was as a learner, do research with professors and connect with them, which translated really well into grad school. And I found that going to grad school actually brought me closer to my professors at King's, a lot of whom I still connect with now more than I used to when I first graduated. Darcy, Fisher, and I constantly talk about stats and are always coding together. So I found it a good transition.
What language? I could use a code checker.
R. What do you use? Oh, good job. Nice.
Always an R. I'd love to get into Python, but who has the time?
No thanks.
Great, thank you guys. We'll get to the last question and then we'll jump back to our one that we skipped earlier. So the next one is, how did you develop community at your new school/city? And we'll start with Elise for this one.
Oh, I got put on this question. This is such an interesting one for me. So I went to UVic and I was in a long distance relationship with the man I'm now married to the whole time I was there. So I feel like I could have tried harder and I wish that I had, but I didn't know anybody in Victoria. I was terrified of the whole experience. I was so scared I was going to fail. But one thing that I did do that I thought was really helpful was we had a humanities, like a graduate humanities study room that basically only history students hung out in. It actually kind of became a departmental issue that historians were taking over the room, but it is what it is. Anyway, I just made sure that I was always there. Anytime I was studying, I was there. I made sure I prioritized talking to my classmates because we all learned almost more from each other than we did through our coursework. And we were all just like piecing it together. And I had a fairly small cohort and we all studied very different things. So it never felt very competitive, which I really liked. And I felt like that was a really good way for us to all kind of be on the same page about stuff. And really me hanging out there meant that like other people came to hang out there, not necessarily because it was popular, just because I was like there all the time and they knew there was going to be someone to talk to. So I think that was something that I really like to do. So if there's like ever a specific room for your department or whatever, and you can study there, like just do it. You won't regret it.
I guess I'll jump in on this one. I'll say really quickly, because I'm also in an international program, just jumping back to what Josh said about visas. If you are a Canadian student, you do not need a formal visa to study in the US. You will get all your documents straight from the States and it is pretty smooth. So if anyone was intimidated about that, my international transition to the United States could not have been easier. I would say a huge part of community, for those of you who know, I worked very, very close with Professor Neil DeRue when I was at King's. He's wonderful, amazing. And he also went to Boston College. So he was able to connect me with some people at Boston College before I came here. I was very, very fortunate, kind of what you were saying a little bit earlier, Elise. I had, 1 hour and a half phone calls with potential advisors before I made my decision. And, I in terms of what Ian was saying about learning what this program is like from students, the program that I went to before you made your decision whether you wanted to accept the author or not, there was student-only meetings in which there were no professors present, where the students in the program would talk to you about what the program was like, and they were really honest with us. They're like, look, this is what you want to do. My professors at King's, like I said, because of the connection, he was like, you might want to avoid this professor and stick with these professors. These are the ones that will help you. But in terms of a more social sense, yeah, there's like, it's great because my program, I'm a PhD student. The PhD cohort is very small, but there's a huge number of master's students. So there's so many people with whom you can find similar interests. Philosophy is one of those disciplines where everyone kind of brings their own lens and their own thing they're interested in along with philosophy. So kind of find those secondary interests, figure out what people do for fun, their spare time, and you'll find new people. Same thing, I moved somewhere where I knew no one, moved to a new country. I was really excited. I kind of love doing those sort of things, going where I don't know anyone and kind of jumping right in. And I would say just don't be afraid to jump right in, you know, go to things, be in the department. That's huge. Don't be the person, the new student that's always at home, given, you know, if it wasn't COVID, you know, once things are a little more in person, don't be the person that's just always at home and never comes in, you know, go into the department, spend time talking. I've made so many friends just because I've been in the office and was available to join an office conversation when people were just chatting about their weekend and that sort of thing. It's kind of those little things and putting in that little bit of extra effort that I think can really transform your graduate school experience. So that's what I would say about community.
Great. So we'll jump back to our question that we skipped, but we'll reframe it a little bit in terms of what is your best piece of advice about applying? And we'll try to keep it to 1 or 2 pieces of advice, and then we'll open it up to free questions. That way, if you have any burning things still on your mind, we can ask those questions. And I have a few other questions prepared in case none of you have anything. So we'll start with Josh with this one.
Right. Yeah. My advice about applying isn't really about applying. It's about whatever location you're actually going to. So for me, I went to Edinburgh, and I'd been to Edinburgh before on vacation, but I was only there for a day. I didn't really get to check it out. And so when I got accepted, I was like, oh, sweet. I'm gonna get an apartment as close to school as I can, because that just seemed to make sense for me. You know, 8-minute walk to school. If you Google New College Edinburgh, that's my building that I studied in. It looks like Hogwarts. I was like, yeah, I want to be right there. And it's right next to the castle and stuff. Like, this is sweet. But because I did that, I didn't get a lot of quiet, because where my apartment was kind of the equivalent of like living on Jasper Ave. So there was never any quiet I could have. Even in my apartment, the sound from the street would always come in. And so for me, just for my own sanity, if I could redo it, I would either get an apartment in a surrounding town and just take the train in to school every day, or I would get a apartment or a house or whatever, like kind of more near a green space. Because for me, you know, I go for walks every day. I'm like, oh, sweet, Edmonton's got all these parks, but in Edinburgh is like, you got cool architecture, but I kind of want to hear some birds chirp once in a while. So yeah. Not so much about applying, but wherever you do end up living at your graduate school, I'd say be smart as to where you'll actually live, because I think my experience was very hampered because I was kind of in a bad part of town, in my opinion. So I'm so glad I went, but just yeah, be smart.
Great. We'll jump to Ian, and then we'll open it up for questions if any of you have questions, and then yeah, we'll conclude the evening.
Just general advice, get interested and get reading before you get in, so you know what you're getting into, and re-upping that emphasis on deadlines, because they sneak up on you, and there's a lot of them, and they happen to overlap. So keep your documents straight, keep your file folder straighter, and get your documents in on time, including refereed letters of support.
Great. So thank you all for preparing those questions ahead of time. I know some of you had a little bit of free notice in terms of what you were going to ask. So yeah, like Kathleen has said, if you have any last words you want to touch on, and then we'll open it up for free questions. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you feel like you need to say something.
I'll just say your professors at King's are pretty good references, I'll say. Like I didn't really have to hunt down anyone for my references when I applied. I got like my former pastor, and then I got Dr. Mark Sandel to write my reference letter, and apparently the University of Edinburgh liked it. So yeah, your professors at King's will be very helpful, and you'll tend to see them on the weekly, so you can badger them if they're not getting you a reference letter in time. So
I think one thing I forgot to say earlier was I applied to like my dream programs right after I graduated, and I did not get into either of them, and I was devastated. And I feel like I shouldn't have been, because I knew that I probably wouldn't get into them. And I think being realistic about what you apply to and knowing that like it might be worth applying just for the sake of applying, but also you might not get into them, is like be measured about it. I was like very emotional about it. I was completely wrecked, and I had to like build myself back up to apply again. And then I went to UVic, which turned out to be way better than I think either of the other programs I had applied to. But yeah, lots of, I think most people don't get into the first programs they apply to, and that's super normal. Doesn't mean you're not intelligent. It doesn't mean you won't get in. It just means you didn't find the right fit yet, or you didn't know who else was in the application pile. So don't be discouraged.
I'll just, say something really quickly in response to that. There's a huge variation in different programs. For instance, a lot of people have been saying King's, you're used to a very small applicant pool. So I would say it's great to have schools like apply to your reach schools, like absolutely apply to your realistic schools, and then apply to a couple schools, like say maybe smaller schools in Canada, wherein you have a really good chance of getting in, just so you kind of have that scale. And like you said, I'd say be a good combination of optimistic and realistic. Like I applied straight into PhD because my discipline allows for that. I applied to PhD programs, and I had like 2 backup masters just in case. Somehow I ended up getting into my first choice. So things kind of rolled out that way. But yeah, be optimistic and be realistic. Have options.
I'll bounce off that real quick. Yeah, I'd just say apply to just a bunch of schools if you want. And like for me, I used to live in Europe right out of high school, so I was like, yeah, I want to go back to Europe. And so I just, in my phone, I just had a list of like several dozen schools that I wanted to apply to. And they weren't necessarily from like most wanted to least wanted. It was just like, they got good programs, I'm going to apply. And so Edinburgh wasn't my first choice, but I got in, and it was sick. Kind of bouncing off what Ian said. I applied to Oxford, but I had a document come in a day late. So they basically told me I'm an idiot and to try again next year. So yeah, just apply everywhere and see kind of where God leads you, and yeah, make sure you got your documents on time.
We'll jump to Ian.
I would advocate for going into a master's program first, particularly in the sciences, not because that's what I did, but because in a lot of cases, especially I know at the University of Alberta, if you are especially 100% interested in the topic that you're studying at hand, you always have the opportunity to transition into that PhD program and to commit to that. In my case, I cranked out a master's thesis and then decided that that research wasn't for me anymore, and that's okay. So I tried some other things and then started working for Environment Canada. And then my boss and I at Environment Canada decided, hey, I am interested in this and really engaging in this. So maybe if I'm doing the work of a PhD student doing research, maybe I should get a PhD while I'm doing this research work. So like, it was very helpful to me, I think, to have that credential in hand already as a master's, and to know I wasn't interested in continuing to pursue that direction and being okay with that. So I think that door is open to you to make that transition later if you want to. Plus, I know in Alberta anyways, if you transition from a master's program to a PhD, I think the Alberta government kicks you a couple $1,000s in scholarship money. I can't remember how much.
I mean, I want scholarship money now, but geez. So we'll open it up to questions if any of you guys have any. Otherwise, I do have a few questions and one area that was not addressed a little bit. So if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them now. You can put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself if you'd like to.
I was wondering where you would look to see for scholarship money for master's programs. Like, is there a specific place you look?
Definitely depends on the program. If it's humanities, sciences, or health research, you're either going to SSHRC or CIHR and NSERC. So at least looking for those like stipend level scholarships. I don't know about SSHRC or CIHR, but I know NSERC has master's and PhD scholarships that are up in the tens of thousands of dollars per year. It won't make you rich, but you won't starve kind of scholarships. So keep an eye on those and keep an eye on the deadlines. The NSERC scholarship in particular is nothing to shake a stick at, and it takes a long time to put together a good application.
I studied theology and no theologian has money to give for scholarships, so I was kind of hung out to dry. But yeah, I did get some scholarships eventually in Scotland, but not prior to actually attending.
The program that I went to fully funds all of the students that they take, which was super nice. I actually don't know how I missed it, but I didn't know that when I applied to the program. So that was like a super fun surprise for me. I was ready to like take on a bunch more student debt, and then I didn't have to do that, which was awesome. But they did strongly encourage us all to apply for SSHRC. I luckily wasn't able to because my program was too short, and you had to have like a certain research period that you were studying, I guess, because I watched the rest of my cohort in the like traditional master's program, not the public history one, just like suffer through those applications, and they are long and they take a long time to put together, and they like require a lot of support from everybody in the department. So, but so some programs do it that way too, that they encourage you to apply for SSHRC, but they also fully fund you regardless. It is contingent on maintaining an A- average, but my graduate department head told us that like they've never kicked out a student. They are pretty invested in making sure everybody in the program maintains an A- average because otherwise it looks really bad for them. So
Great. I saw Evan had a hand up, if that's still relevant.
Yeah, I just had a question. I know Taylor kind of talked on it a little bit earlier, but I'm kind of one of those students who has decided now to take a gap year. I graduated from King's like 6 weeks ago. So it's very fresh still for me, but I'm kind of just wondering like if any of you have any advice on like any main things that I could be or should be doing during the time in between undergrad and grad school and taking a year off. Psychology, Ian.
Again, I'm not in psychology, but I think generally, and there are some people interested in psychology in my program, the thing to do is stay up to date on current research at the programs that you might be interested in. So if you're interested in getting into a master's program in Canada, figure out, or a PhD, whatever it may be, figure out what those people are doing, where they're presenting, see if you can even, sometimes conferences, like they're free and online and you can listen to people talk that you're interested in. So just know what's kind of going on in the world that you're interested in. See if you have connections of people in psychology programs, email them, talk to them, make connections at schools if you can, if you know people that are studying things that you're interested in, that's really huge. But yeah, it's kind of what Ian was saying, keep reading, stay up to date. I can speak for the PhD. I don't really know what the case is, especially if you're doing a more practical master's, but for the PhD, they kind of do want to know what you're doing in a gap year. Like they don't want you to just be doing nothing in a gap year. I know, Taylor, you said for yours, it's very career focused. I can see how that would totally work to take a year off. But if you're really wanting to go into really academic PhD program, not one, like for instance, mine was not through a job like Ian's, I applied to a PhD for the PhD. They do want to know what you're doing in that gap year to keep up your studies. But you know, if you can really spend that time getting to know people and polishing the application, asking your King's professors to read over your applications, your application can be much stronger for it.
My advice is nothing to do with academic things. Take some time to recover from your undergraduate degree. Like I thought that I wanted to go straight into grad school afterwards, and I didn't get to do that. And that was really the best thing that could have happened to me, because I needed time. I needed to recover from that. I worked really hard on my undergrad. I like hiked up my GPA in my last 2 years so that I could get into grad school. And I was just like burnt out. And I know that's not the case for everybody, but I mean, school kind of puts you through the ringer. Like just take some time. Also, that's so interesting, Anna, that that comment about schools looking at your gap year. Mine didn't at all. I didn't do anything related to my program during my gap year. Maybe it's because I studied history and things tend to change a little less. But yeah, I worked at a bike shop. Like I didn't do anything historical, but yeah, it's a little different program to program, obviously. But yeah, my biggest recommendation would be just take some time to live your life.
I know
Sorry,
it's
2 cents quickly. Oh,
Oh, go, Ryleigh, go.
I think schools care about your investment in the field that you're studying. So maybe it's not necessarily going down the academic path and figuring out what researchers are doing, but what is your investment in psychology, and how are you engaged with it? Is it that you're willing to partner with a professor who's currently doing research for free and say that I'll do all the grunt work for you so that you can learn about psychology research in the process and maybe get on a paper? Is it wanting to work with kids in psychology, and in which case just being in an environment where you're working with kids, like as an EA in the schooling system in Edmonton or whatnot, are all things that are showing that you're dedicated to what you're doing and you're learning and you're getting all this life experience? Because I could tell the difference between students in my program that had worked and had life experience and those who just jumped from undergrad to a graduate program. There was a big difference.
I did my gap year right out of high school. I went to Bible school in Germany. I was part of Torchbearers, if you're familiar with Torchbearers. So I don't know. I wouldn't say like frick off to Europe is good advice, but if you have the means of doing that, I think there's no shame in just like spending a couple months elsewhere and learning about other cultures and stuff and being immersed in that. Because it certainly helped me, and like I gained new perspective on things. So I mean, with COVID, it's a bit difficult, but yeah, I don't think there's any shame in just being like, I want to go see cool things for a couple months.
And if no one else has anything to answer and add to that, we'll get to Nicole's question.
So currently kind of in the same boat as Evan, and I just graduated as well. And I'm working on studying for the LSAT. But during my studies at King's, I had a lot of interest in a lot of different areas. And I'm definitely like really looking forward to going down like the law school route. But I also wanted to know, like, there's so many master's programs out there. And it kind of seems very overwhelming when I look at like anything outside of at least like a professional program. So I'm wondering how you guys like siphoned through grad schools and figuring out what you wanted to do, because I know like history might be an easy thing to say, okay, public history, but then there's a lot of different kind of avenues. So yeah.
I'll start on that, I guess. I think what helped me is adopting an attitude of what I would call making it up as I go along, but also what my mother would call, she has this perfect phrase for it, but it's just constantly being open to new opportunities. Planned happenstance, that's what she calls it. Where you just make yourself ready for any opportunity that's going to present itself in front of you. So that's how I approached my master's at any rate. I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be doing this forever. I've made that pretty clear, but I saw it as a way to jump off into something else. You've made yourself, by going to grad school, a bit of a commodity. People have vetted you. People have put you through the ringer to show that you can operate at a level that not everyone can operate at, or do things that other people just can't do. And so that commodity in and of itself can be valuable. That in grad school is just not the end of things. Like, for example, me, I went and got my master's. Now I'm in a PhD program, but I had colleagues who finished masters in toxicology, but then they went on to grad school they went on to law school because they saw a career path for themselves that didn't open up before they went through a not professional program, because all of a sudden this person thought, wow, there's booming biotechnology business. I could really get into patent law because I have this microbiome literacy that I didn't have before. So like, it's not necessarily knowing the end goal so much as knowing where your strengths might lie and being able to jump to those new opportunities when those opportunities arise.
I'll say something really quick. I would say think about like, what do you actually like? Like, what do you like to do? Which is kind of, it seems like an obvious question, but I don't think it is. Because I think your undergrad goes so fast that it's often hard to think, well, why would I want to continue this? What do I like? So for instance, I applied to programs that were very teaching focused and very research focused. And in thinking, because philosophy, the programs can be a little more general. So with the faculty themselves are more individualized. That's kind of where you end up making that choice where you have a variety. But I liked being around people. That's what I loved about King's, is that I could always be around people and always be around professors. So when making my final decisions, I ended up choosing what I know would keep me in grad school, which was opportunities to teach, because I knew that would keep me integrated into the community. So that was something really important for me in making the selection of like, okay, I have all these options, which is the one that will keep my studies exciting and fresh, because the last thing you want is to end up somewhere where it goes stale and you kind of forget why you did it in the first place. So I think that would be an important question to ask yourself too.
I think that's where work experience becomes really important too, because I didn't even want to go to grad school when I graduated from King's. I just wanted to be a teacher, and that was perfectly fine for me. And it wasn't until I started working in international development that I wanted to pursue a master's. And then just looking online at researchers that I had encountered along the way and where they were working, because obviously if I liked them as researchers, I would probably be interested in them as professors and appreciate the institution that they were working at because they were funding their research. So those are what helped me decide on which programs I wanted to go through. And after research, actually an ad on Facebook popped up, and that's how I found my program. And it was a perfect fit because Facebook knows me better than I know myself, apparently. But yeah, what are your interests? What are professors or what researchers are you interested in? Which institutions and programs do they teach in? Because all of those questions and solutions are going to get you closer to the program that's the right fit for you, because there are a lot out there.
For me, maybe I was a bit of a special case, but I figured out my research topic very late in the academic year, actually. And so originally I wanted to study Protestantism in Russia, but one of the professors at the university said, like, well, I think you'll kind of be wasting your time because none of us here really know a lot about that. And so I chatted with another professor and she said, okay, well, what are you interested in? And I said, well, the imagination and why God gives us an imagination. And she said, well, why don't you study a painting? Because that's a pretty like tangible expression of the imagination. And so technically I'm an art historian now. I didn't expect to be that when I went to university, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. So I looked at one painting for 4 months, and yeah, that's where my research led me. And so it's been quite the journey. I didn't expect it to be like that, but yeah, like what Dr. Sandel said, like you don't need to plan all the steps. You just kind of need to know what the next one is, and then I think it'll pan out. The painting is Woman Holding a Balance by Johannes Vermeer. I don't know if Vermeer's the artist who did that painting with the woman looking like this with the pearl earrings. Yeah, I can't do this molder, but yeah, so painting is called Woman Holding a Balance. And so I studied that for 4 months and now have a copy of it in my room because why not?
I think in history as a discipline is so huge, and there's all kinds of different avenues you can go into. I didn't even know the public history program existed, but when I was I was just Googling professors in Canada. I knew I wanted to do my graduate work in Canada. I just felt like that was less complicated. And I was just looking at professors, and I could just eliminate them based on what they study. And they'll usually have a list of what their the students they advise are studying, and that really helps too. Public history was a really cool program because it doesn't have a thesis, it has a project, which I really loved because I hated the idea that I would work on this whole thesis for so long and nobody would ever look at it. Sorry if I'm triggering anybody, but I was like, I have to do something that like can go out there in the world. And speaking of becoming things that you didn't think you were going to become, I became a podcaster through that. And I had no idea how to edit like audio or anything. I just like taught myself how to do it and figured it out. So like graduate programs can be just a big sandbox too, right? Like just a huge opportunity to play. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of graduate students, the stress of it all kind of takes away from that. But it's like useful to remember that yeah, you're kind of there to like figure stuff out and play with a bunch of different things and see what happens.
If anyone else has any pieces of advice, otherwise I do have one last burning question, which kind of just popped into my mind. Do you have any resources that you might have used for creating your letter of intent at all? And if so, what advice do you have for creating your letter of intent? Where do people start?
I just winged it and it worked. I don't know. I don't have good.
I would say, number one, get your professors to read it, ask your professors. Number two, be specific. A graduate program will not care about your letter of intent if it doesn't show that you care about them. So you have to talk about the exact professors and the exact thing that you want to do at that master's program. You can't be general. You have to make a customized letter for each program. It's like applying to a job, right? It's like a cover letter. You would never just reuse a cover letter for two jobs if that was really what you wanted to do. So you have to be specific. Why would a graduate program bring in a student that was less invested in what was actually going on in the school than one that wasn't? So I would say for the humanities, that's what I can speak to. Usually it's a little introduction. This is what I'm interested in. This is what I've done in my undergraduate or master's in my interest. I've been a research assistant. I wrote on this. I studied this. I did X course. I did X work experience. This is why this program fits for me. This professor is studying this. Great. That's what I want to do. This professor is doing this. It's not good enough. Well, at least for my discipline, you want a more than one professor that you're interested in. It's like a combination of factors. And then if there's something specific about the program, for instance, I teach Introduction to Philosophy to undergraduates. Well, in my undergrad, I was a philosophy tutor and I loved it. So I think this program would be a good fit for me and I think I could thrive here. So that's my biggest advice. Be specific and then talk to your professors. Be like, read this letter. What do you think? Please give me some feedback on something like that. You can propose a project. It depends on the programs. Some programs don't want you to be specific about your interests and they want you to be very open. Some of them do want you to have something specific that you want to do. I don't know what that's like in different disciplines, but that would be my advice for a statement of intent. I don't have a specific resource. I would say professors are the best resource. Yeah.
I can just speak to the other students still at King's. I'm just finishing up this semester, and I just went last semester to my profs and told them if they could make it an assignment. So I wrote my letter of intent as an assignment, which then they gave feedback to, which I've already applied to master's programs, and I'm now waiting to hear if they'll interview me for them, or, kind of waiting for next steps. So hopefully. But it was just kind of neat that they agreed and accepted it as an assignment. So, since you got to do it anyways.
I think when you're writing it, it's also important for you to talk about what would be next, why this program, because they're going to get so many different people interested in the program. This is what I've already done to get me here, but they care about their brand and what's next for you. So what is your deep hope? Why this program over a different program? And the other thing I would encourage you to include is what do you have to invest in the program? Are you a community builder? Does that align really well with the motives and the structure of the program you're applying to? Is it really collaborative? Can you speak into those qualities of the program and who you are as a person, knowing that it's going to be a relationship that is mutually flourishing and beneficial, not just you have all these things for me, I need this degree, but what do we have together? And I think that is also an important part of the letter of intent.
Great. Does anyone else have any last questions?
I just have a really quick one, just in case anybody had this experience, but I'm kind of at this point where I don't really know whether I should be applying for a thesis-based or a course-based master's program. I'm starting to lean more towards the thesis-based idea, but I'm just curious if any of you had kind of wrestled with that at all, and kind of how you came to a decision or a conclusion about what you wanted to do there.
I did.
What discipline are you in?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Psychology.
Psychology, right? Yeah. I ended up doing project-based, not it was course-based, but I was scared a little bit that if I ever wanted to do a PhD program, that wouldn't, like, the project wouldn't fly. However, you can now do public history PhDs, and then they would value your public history over whether you did a thesis or not. So I think it's really program specific, but I think generally as a rule, I hear that if you're looking to go into a PhD program after your master's, you'll want to do a thesis. It's just something I've heard a number of times.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the field. I did a project-based one, but the amount of research that has come out of it is way more than anything that a thesis program in a different institution could ever have offered me. And I've been able to publish more than I would have if I had gone down the thesis route. So with my program, I was able to do stats and research-oriented things because that's what I was passionate about while I was still meeting all the credits and doing all the coursework and doing the projects. And I would be able to still apply for a PhD based on that, but it would be something that you would need to look into for your specific discipline.
I'll just say I had a lot of fun writing my dissertation in a weird way, even though it's just like a lot of schoolwork every day for a couple months. But yeah, I think I got a lot out of it. So.
Yeah, great. So if no one else has any more questions, we'll conclude the evening. And just to give you all a thank you for coming out tonight in terms of listening and also presenting and discussing with us. It was great to meet all of you and see familiar faces again. And then also just hope that we can stay in touch with some. But if you have any last questions, you can also send them our way to our alumni email, and we'll forward them as appropriate to some individuals too. So yeah, thank you all for joining us, and round of applause to all of our lovely presenters.
Thank you to all of the presenters. And if we don't have your current email, please give us, your current address. Please give us your current address by sending us an email, and Shay will be sending something out in the mail to you. And for students, next month, we're going to look specifically at finances and life after graduation. And so Taylor, your brother is coming on, who now works at a bank, and he's going to do finances for us. And so that'll be helpful as well. So thank you guys, everyone, for coming out, and we'll hope to see you again. Best wishes.
You have been tuning in to an offering from the Centre for Career and Calling here at the King's University in Edmonton, Alberta. Till next time.